Hello beautiful people, my name is Venti and today I'm going to be bringing you my big spring cleaning book unhaul. Over the past couple of months, I have accumulated a rather sizable collection of books that just don't belong on my shelves anymore. Some of these books I have read and decided to part ways with, and others I discovered during my big shelf overhaul where I moved my read books to the setup that you guys normally see in my videos nowadays. During that shelf divide, I realized that some of these books are just ones that for whatever reason I have sort of lost the spark for. They are no longer books that I necessarily am drawn to reading and are better off finding some new homes. As I'm filming this right now, I don't actually know how many books there are that I'm going to be showing you, but I do know that they fill like 2 rather big tote bags, so it really is for the best that I just get started and start showing you the books that are no longer serving me and that you likely won't see anymore on my channel. So without further ado, please join me in saying goodbye to the following books. And I think we're gonna kick this video off spicy by showing you The Girl in the Tower and The Winter of the Witch, books 2 and 3 in the Winter Night trilogy by Catherine Arden. Now these might be some surprising additions to this unhaul if you are familiar with my channel, given that I love both Catherine Arden and the Winter Night trilogy especially. The only reason I'm getting rid of these books is because I have bought different covers to match my copy of The Bear and the Nightingale. This is a purchase that I went back and forth on for quite a little bit because I don't want to be like an over consumer of things. However, these books are the UK paperbacks and have no flop to them. They have absolutely no give, and the one thing that I cannot stand on my paperbacks is bent spines. The texture under my fingers just drives me crazy and I can't focus on the story inside. And because I love the Winter Night trilogy and would reread it over and over again, which is sort of one of my new criteria for keeping books on my shelves, I knew that I had to get copies of the books that I would be able to do so with relatively comfortably. In a similar vein, I'm also getting rid of this mass market paperback copy of The Princess Bride by William Goldman. The Princess Bride is one of my favorite stories. The movie is something that I watched truly countless times throughout my childhood, and I definitely need to give it a rewatch. It is basically a modern classic at this point, and it follows Buttercup and Wesley and their love story. They are a noble woman and a farm boy who was one of her servant people, and shortly after they fell in love, Wesley went out to go seek his fortune so that he could be a proper husband to Buttercup, but then as far as she knows, he died and a prince proposes to her, and how do you say no to a prince's proposal? So basically Buttercup sort of resigns herself to a loveless but relatively wealthy marriage until she is kidnapped by a mercenary group of 3 people who seem intent on starting a war between her prince's kingdom and a neighboring kingdom, and they are interrupted in their kidnapping / murder plot of her by the arrival of the dread pirate Roberts, who is chasing her down. And the story kind of goes from there. I love this book. I lent it out to a friend who cracked the spine just a little bit, so I haven't actually reread it in a very long time because I couldn't physically do it. And now I have a 50th anniversary edition of this book, so I am a little bit sorry to see this nostalgic copy that I've had for many years go, but now I have a copy that I can finally reread without giving myself a little bit of a conniption. I'm gonna put it down because touching that spine even a little bit is driving me nuts. I'm also getting rid of Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. If you watched my February wrap-up, you know that this book just didn't quite work for me. It follows a young woman named Grace Porter who has just graduated with her PhD in astrophysics, and when she and her 2 best friends go to Vegas to celebrate this milestone in Porter's life, she winds up waking up after a drunk night out, realizing that she is married to a complete stranger, and the story kind of goes from there. There's more to it. It's a lot about a woman going through sort of a quarter-life crisis and realizing that because she is queer, because she is Black, because she is so type A and has driven down this path for so long, she's very lost right now and doesn't know where she fits in within this larger world of academia, or really who she is the moment you take away the veneer of other people's expectations on her. And on paper, that all sounds very interesting. I just found the execution to not really work for me, so ready to let it go and put it in somebody else's hands. A more recent read that I am getting rid of is Scared Little Rabbits by A.V. Geiger. This is a young adult thriller following Nora Weinberg as she goes to this sort of tech makers camp in her sort of mid-high school career. Nora's something of a loner at all times, and she doesn't really find herself likable. She's rather insecure, but she does know that she can code one hell of a code. I don't know enough code to talk about this, and I'm gonna stop saying code because it stopped feeling like a real word. Actually, I feel like the back cover blurb does a pretty solid job explaining it. When Nora gets accepted into her dream summer program at the prestigious Winthrop Academy, she jumps at the chance to put her coding skills to use. But then a fellow student goes missing, and the tech trail for the crime leads back to Nora. Running scared, Nora must race to clear her name and uncover the sordid truth, or she might be the next to disappear. That sort of synopsis, the bit that you think like leads up to the inciting incident that's going to be the main part of the plot, that only occurs 2/3 of the way through the book, and then the last little bit is quite rushed. I'll go further into it during my April wrap-up, but I really disagreed with the way that this book was structured. It's just not for me. It can find a happy home on someone's shelves who's going to enjoy it a lot more than I do. Another YA thriller that I'm not going to be continuing, keeping on my shelves, is That Night by Sin Baylog. My review of this is located in my January wrap-up, which I'll have linked in the description box below. It read very much like a mediocre CW teen drama show, which is fine. I did make it to the end of this. I found it pretty middling overall. This is one that I think people might actually like, as opposed to Scared Little Rabbits, which I didn't like very much at all. And for that reason, I think that this one might actually have a chance of finding its way into the hands of somebody who likes it a little better than I did. So I'm gonna give it that chance. After that, I am unhauling the entirety of the Andi Darkin series by Kristen White. That is Andi Darkin, Now I Rise, and Bright We Burn. I'm not sure if that's the order, but I think it is. Long-term viewers of my channel might remember my Andi Darkin vlog, where I buddy read this book in sort of a 24-hour span with one of my first booktube friends, Lou, from the channel, I believe Lou and Life. Well, I've linked in the description box below. I don't think she's posting videos anymore, but in case the backlog is still up, I do recommend you watch them because Lou's great. This story follows a gender-bent Vlad the Impaler called Lada in this story, and she basically goes on the journey of trying to liberate her people from Ottoman colonization. But everything's complicated because she's a woman, and we don't really let women in history do cool and badass things. I actually quite enjoyed this trilogy, but it's just not one that I will be rereading, so I want it to go to the hands of somebody who will enjoy it more long-term than I did. It's one of the ones that I'm most on the fence about getting rid of, frankly. I'm also getting rid of my duplicate copy of Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo. I have the original covers for this series now in all 3 of the books, so I don't need to be keeping this version of Ruin and Rising anymore. I just find that the old covers of the Grisha trilogy encompass the vibe of the story quite a bit better. And because that is a story that I love very much and will be rereading, I figured I might as well get the copies on my shelf to reflect the version of the story that I think is best and is most nostalgic towards me. RIP to the show. You will be missed. Can't believe it got canceled. Like, I'm still actively mad about that. I'm also getting rid of my copy of Traitor Through the Throne by Alwyn Hamilton. This is the second book in her Rebel of the Sands series. I've not read a Rebel of the Sands. I don't know how I came about having a copy of the second book in a series that I haven't even started, but again, if I want to give this series a try, I will pick it up in my library. I don't need to have this. I don't need to carry it around anymore. I'm also getting rid of Reflection, A Twisted Tale by Elizabeth Lim. This is part of the Disney Reimagined Tale series, wherein an author takes an existing Disney property and gives it a little twist. In this case, the twist is, what if Mulan had to travel to the underworld? I like this series. I find them incredibly bingeable. I do prefer to read them on audio from Libby. So far, I have not read one, including this one, that has stuck out to me and wowed me to the point where I want to reread them. So this one will be making its way out of my house as well. I'm going to stop saying that because clearly if it's an Unhaul, that's what's going to happen. I will also be getting rid of my copy of Itun Kiss Volume 1 by Karu Tada. This series follows a well-meaning and sweet but kind of airheaded and dumb young girl called Kotoko after she confesses her feelings to the clever sort of ice king boy of her school. She writes him what she feels is sort of like the perfect love letter, and Naoki, the boy, just absolutely crushes her heart and soul and rejects her. But when an earthquake tears Kotoko's house down, she and her father have to move in with one of his old college buddies. And whose house does that happen to be but Naoki's? And the two of them have this like whole forced proximity thing going on. I liked the K-drama of this show because I could watch it like relatively quickly and binge watch it, but it did kind of crush my heart and soul a little bit because it just took too long for the feelings to happen. And when the sort of reverse confession from Naoki to Kotoko did eventually happen, it felt crazy rushed because throughout the entirety of the series, he was just kind of relentlessly mean to her. There was never really a point where it let up, and so I just felt like I was getting emotional whiplash and like I was following the love story for no reason. Also, if I recall correctly, in the manga, there is a scene of slight sexual harassment toward the minor that is Kotoko, and that's just not a thing that I really want to keep on my shelves. I'm also getting rid of my copy of The Near Witch by Victoria Schwab. This is the first book that B.E. Schwab ever wrote. It follows a young girl named Lexi who lives inside this like rather patriarchal village that is quite insular and sort of small-minded, and Lexi kind of rebels against these rules the way that her father did, but then a stranger arrives in town and then bad things start happening in town, like children start going missing and everyone's blaming the stranger for no actual reason. But really what's happening in this story is Lexi kind of arguing with the elders of her village, male mostly, going out into the woods when she's not supposed to, talking to the village like hedge witches who live on the fringes, and going back home. And that happens like 4 or 5 times. And then the book kind of ends. I don't know. There's a short story at the end of this book called, I think, the Ashborne Boy. Yes, the Ashborne Boy. It is a short story that takes over the last sort of 20-ish pages. That is the backstory for one of the characters in this book. And I honestly think that short story beats out the entirety of the Near Witch by leaps and bounds. It is so much better than the story of the Near Witch itself. V.E. Schwab has grown tremendously as a writer, but this book just absolutely wasn't for me. And though I like the Ashborne Boy, it is not enough for me to justify keeping an entire book on my shelves anymore. So it's gotta go. Now we're on to a couple of books that I read so many years back that my working memory of them is just absolutely shot. We're starting with Masterpiece by Elise Broach. As far as I know, this is about a sort of Charlotte's Webby kind of grasshopper that ends up being able to write and ends up helping a young boy solve some sort of a mystery. This could be absolutely an incorrect synopsis of this book. I will be getting rid of this one. It was a very sweet read, but even back when I read it, like in early high school, maybe even late middle school, it wasn't one of those books that I felt the need to continue on with or reread at any point in time, even though it's been on my shelf for, at this point, about a decade. Then we have A Temptation of Angels by Michelle Zink. This, I think, came out around the time of like the Clockwork Angel books. So when like the Victorian steampunk aesthetic was kind of the thing that authors were going for. I know it follows a young girl in Victorian England, and I think she's part angel, or there's 2 angel boys who like she's in a love triangle with. This book just, it gives, to my recollection, very like Twilight-esque YA of like the early 2010s. But if I was going to continue with this series, it would have had to be back then, and I don't know that this series ever continued. Like, I think that this series was dropped, even though this book does not end in any sort of like a conclusive ending, but I don't need to keep it on my shelves. It's pretty thick and I don't need to carry that around with me anymore. Next, we have Consequences of Defensive Adultery by M. Jane Collette. This book is special because it was the first book that I ever won in a Goodreads giveaway. Simply, it must have been a decade ago at this point. So just to blurb it, all Elizabeth wanted was an experienced, dominant lover. She ended up with a husband she doesn't love, a stepdaughter who hates her, an ex-wife who won't forgive her, and the less said about her new sister-in-law, the better. Forced to reveal the consequences of her youthful affair to a new lover, Elizabeth is shocked to discover he's showing her the path to freedom, absolution, and love. This story is a little bit genre bending, if I recall correctly. It's a little bit erotica. It's a little bit like literary fiction, sort of reflection on a difficult life. And to my best recollection, it is indie published, so I hope that this finds its way into the hands of a reader who will love and champion it and M. Jane Collette's work. Then we have a secondary copy of Shadow and Bone. If you've been on YouTube, you know what the Grishaverse series is about, so I'm not going to go into that, and I will let this pretty pristine copy back out into the world for anybody who's trying to complete their original cover collection. If you know about the series, then you know this one fits the vibe better. I just find them nicer. No shade to the person who did the cover art for this version, but it hits different. It's better. For me, I don't know. I'm also unhauling Shamrock by Jolie Sue Burkhart. This is a reverse harem romance novella, probably novelette. I'm pretty sure those are even shorter, and this is quite short. Following a young woman who's just left an abusive relationship and who is an artist but has sort of felt this like artist's block, and in her dreams she begins to be visited by these ancient Celtic beings, and basically she and one of these guys, a gargoyle named Duran, have to go out and find his other friends, and these other beings have wound up to be this sort of motorcycle gang who are all gritty, and she's like a reincarnation of their collective true love. I can see the appeal of this book, but it ended up being not quite for me, so moving on, letting it go, throwing it way back for the next couple of books I'm going to be showing you. Starting with Matched by Ali Condi. In this world, to the best of my recollection, people are found a sort of perfect romantic match. They are matched to people, and what do you know? Our protagonist ends up falling for somebody who isn't her perfect match, and then they have to like traverse into a desert and find a place where they can be in love. I don't know, but I've heard that the rest of the trilogy goes fully off the rails, and it's time for me to get rid of this one. There's no need to hold on to something that I'm never going to continue. We have volumes 1 and 2 of Vampire Knight by Matsuri Hino. This is one of the sort of nostalgia manga series that I will be continuing. I have my complete series. Don't worry, not getting rid of those. They are my deepest and truest loves, I think. But these extra copies can make their way into the hands of somebody else because I hope to infect somebody else with the love that I have for this series. We're also getting rid of my extra copy of Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. I don't love this series, but I do own the whole of it and I don't need a second copy of the primary book. In a future Unhaul, I might be putting the rest of the series in there as well, but I want to give them at least one more reread to see whether they hold up enough for me to consider them like some of the book candy books that I get to keep. Then we have Isla and the Happily Ever After by Stephanie Perkins. This is, I think, the second or the third book that began with Anne and the French Kiss, which was huge on BookTube in like 2010. This is a signed copy. I actually met her at YALLFest and she was a delight, Stephanie Perkins was. And even though I didn't really love Anne and the French Kiss, I figured I might as well support a recent release by an author who just seemed so nice. Then I read Isla and I was like, I'm not going to be continuing with books like this anymore. This is one of those books that made me think that I didn't really love contemporaries. So there's no reason for me to keep that remnant on my shelf. I'm also getting rid of The Unbecoming of Mara D. This is the first book in the Mara D series by Michelle Hodkin. Could I tell you what this book is about? No. So the blurb says, you wake up with no memory of the last few days. Your friends were killed in an accident that you miraculously survived. Your family has to move to another state to escape the fallout. You meet a mysterious boy who seems to know more about your past than you do. You start seeing things that can't possibly be there. You're afraid you are losing your mind. Can you keep it together? Mara D is about to find out. Sure, I guess that might be what this is about. I truly have no recollection. I know a lot of people who really love this trilogy and who are still waiting with anxious breath for the third book in the follow-up trilogy, something about Noah Shaw, who I'm pretty sure is the dude alluded to in that sort of back cover blurb. I'm not one of those people. And for those people, in case they do not have a copy of the book for their own, here is one donated out into the wild. Then we have a mass market paperback edition of Fool's Assassin. I think the first book, yes, the first book to the Fits in the Fool series and the concluding trilogy of Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings saga. I have not read this book, but I now have a copy that is bigger and whose spine I don't have to be afraid about breaking. Robin Hobb books are ones that I will be coming back to probably for my entire life, so I did want a slightly more durable copy than a mass market paperback for myself, so I'm glad to have finished my collection there. One of those hideous books where the mother dies by Sonia Sons is a novel in verse about a young teenage girl who has to move in with her famous movie star father after her mother passes away. In addition to the grief of losing her parent, she is going through a tremendous amount of complicated and mixed feelings by going to this whole different school and this whole different place, leaving a bunch of people behind, including her best friend and her ex-boyfriend. And it's a lovely, sweet story. It's just not one that I'm going to be rereading, and I want to get it into the hands of a younger reader, possibly, who needs it more than I do. Ditto for American Born Chinese by Jean Lin Yang. This is a graphic novel following a young boy named Jin Wang, who is one of the only Asian people in this new neighborhood that his family has moved to. He's doing his absolute best to fit in, but is just experiencing all this like really racist bullying anyway. Interspersed with all of that is the Chinese fable of the Monkey King. This is a really fantastic graphic novel, but again, I feel like it is better served in someone else's hands. I had a great time reading it, but I don't think I will be picking it back up, at least not anytime really, really soon. And if I want to pick it up again, it's really popular. I can find myself a copy. Then we have this incredibly beat up copy of Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. This is one of my favorite stories. I just want a copy that isn't so completely beat up. We have To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Like, if you went to school in the United States, you've read this book. I like this book quite a bit. I don't love it enough to keep it forever. And I know that some high schooler somewhere at the start of the back to school season will be very happy to find a used book price version of this book because they will need to have it. We also have Visions and Beliefs in the West of Ireland by Lady Augusta Gregory. This is a collection of Irish folktales. I have a nicer, more searchable, and more comprehensive copy of this book. I really enjoy it, but this version, this paperback version, can go off into the world to find somebody who it will serve better than me. And in that sort of cluster of kind of classics, we also have Shirley by Charlotte Bronte. This is not something that I'm going to be picking up to read anytime soon, and again, it's one of those books that it is so ubiquitous that it would be ridiculous to not be able to find it in a library if I ever wanted to. When I am in a Charlotte Bronte mood, I can search it on my Libby app. As it stands now, I don't need to keep 600 pages of novel that I'm not going to pick up soon on my shelf. Space is at a premium and I gotta prioritize. I'm also saying goodbye to the exact opposite of okay and its sequel, A Girl Called Shameless, both by Laura Steven. This story follows a girl named Izzy O'Neill who has to deal with the fallout of her nudes being leaked very publicly, and that story going on just the worst case scenario type of viral rampage. It's a story about what it means to be a teenage girl, about revenge porn, about the way that society as a whole treats young girls as compared to the boys that do crimes to them. And overall, it's a very important story, but again, it's not one that I will be rereading. I did reread the series altogether relatively recently, and I've come to the conclusion that it's time to say goodbye to them from my shelves. A book that I did get pretty far the way into and just decided it didn't work for me is White Trash Warlock by David R. Slayton. This follows a young man named Adam who has the sight. He is a warlock who doesn't have any like formal training in the magical arts, but he does have this power in his bloodline to sort of see things that aren't there and walk in this other kind of magical world. Adam is queer in a place where being a young gay man does not exactly bode well for him, and that coupled with his like seeing things which people sort of wrote off as hallucinations kind of got him institutionalized at one point and estranged from his family. But when Adam's brother contacts him because his wife seems to be haunted by something that he can't understand, Adam follows the call and goes to meet her and realizes that things are worse off than they appear and the entire world is a danger. This is a pretty cool book. The writing just didn't work for me. And unfortunately for me, what I think was the final nail in the coffin, I know it sounds so petty, but it is true and I feel it's best to be honest. The protagonist, Adam, ended up having what seemed to be like a cop love interest. I can't romanticize a cop. There's no degree of sort of suspension of disbelief that I can do to make a cop attractive to me, so it's gotta go. Hopefully it finds its way into the hands of somebody who this works for. Then we have W.M. Mark Simmons, A Witch in Time, the Half-Life Chronicles. I was really excited about this because I wanted to read a zombie book, and then I realized this was like the 4th book in a series, and I don't have the others nor a way to get them in a way that I'd be happy with, so saying goodbye to it. I'm also saying goodbye to Winter Night by Claire Legrand. This is her version of a Nutcracker retelling that's a little bit dark, quite a bit queer, and I enjoyed it, but again, it's not one that I'm going to be revisiting anytime soon. But yeah, if you are into Nutcracker retellings, I do recommend picking this one up. I found this version of Clara to be quite competent and very in control of her own agency, and I love the sort of like twisty and dark take on the Nutcracker. I know that it's a Christmas story, so it's often like seen as pretty sweet, but the ballet itself, like the original sort of story of the Nutcracker, it has some darker elements, and I think that Legrand explores them very well. Again, I liked it. It's just not one I'm going to be rereading. Just a couple more to go now. We have Girl Made of Stars by Ashley Herring Blake. This book follows a young woman named Mara, whose twin brother Owen and her are some of the best of friends, but when Mara's best friend Hannah wakes up after a party having been sexually assaulted and says that Owen was the one who did it, everything Mara knows is just absolutely thrown up into the air, and some things that happened to her earlier in her life, those memories kind of get brought back up, and it's just a story about grief and resilience after sexual assault, and it was very important and very moving, and I can't read this again. This was a one-time read for me, no more, and I will not elaborate further. Yeah, very, very good. Read the trigger warnings. I'm also saying goodbye to The Care and Feeding of a Pet Black Hole by Michelle Cuevas. This is a middle grade novel about a young girl who, after the death of her father, ends up going to the sort of NASA center to send up a recording of her father's laughter with the Voyager shuttle. She ends up bringing back with her a pet black hole that just eats everything, and she can throw a lot of stuff in there, but one day it takes her dog and her little brother, and she has to go inside this black hole, which is a metaphor for her grief, and sort of discover all of the things that she has been burying in here rather than dealing with. It is a lovely story. It deserves to go to a younger reader who needs it more than I do. Then we have A Quiet Kind of Thunder by Sarah Barnard. It follows, if I recall, a young girl with selective mutism asked to help a new deaf student around in her school, and the two of them end up falling in love. This is just a very sweet book, but again, it's not one I'm going to be rereading, but it is one that I want to put out there for younger readers to pick up if they are so inclined. I think this one has a lot of value to it, and I would love to be the person to facilitate getting this book into the hands of a teen who needs it. And we're really not going to be ending on any sort of a hot take. Maybe I should have planned this better, but the last book that I am unhauling for this video is The Hounds of the Morrigan by Pat O'Shea. This is a pretty chunky little story. I consider it kind of middle grade. It gives like Labyrinth with David Bowie vibes, but with old Irish mythology. It follows a 10-year-old boy named Pidge who accidentally releases Oakgloss, a ancient serpent of Irish mythology, out into the world. And with the release of this great serpent, the great forces of good and evil come together to do battle for the fate of the world. I, again, quite like this book, but I will not be rereading it, so I am putting it back out into the world, hoping that it finds a home where it will be read happily by many generations to come. This book is funny, it is sweet, it is just chock full of Irish mythology, which has been of late bastardized by the romantasy genre, so I was happy to see somebody who lives it and loves it write about it so deeply. But on that sort of anticlimactic note, that is it for my big spring cleaning book unhaul. The first tips for all of these books is my local used bookstore that lets you trade books in for store credit, and whatever they don't accept, I'm gonna go ahead and try to donate to my local library so that these books in their sort of annual sales will go to an institution who I enjoy giving money to. I think it's really, really important, especially in modern days, to give as much support as is possible to the continued facilitation of not only third spaces where people of all walks can gather for free and find a variety of resources that are increasingly put up behind paywalls to come by, but also a place that is a repository of information. In an age of misinformation, it is really, really important to support those institutions which actively combat that simply by existing. If you've noticed throughout this video, for a couple of books, I said if I want to revisit the series, I can find them via my Libby app. I will have that app linked in the description box below. If you have a library card, I don't know if it's available worldwide, but at least in the United States and possibly in Canada as well, you can enter that library card number in there and just have access to your library system's array of ebooks and audiobooks. It is completely free to download. If you have a library card, then you already basically have an account, and there are no late fees because the ebooks and the audiobooks are returned by the time that they are due, and you can renew them as long as there's not a waiting list. This is not a video sponsored by Libby by any means. Again, it is just me making a little plug at the end of this video for your local library. But with that out of the way, that is it from me. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave it a thumbs up, and if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I post videos every Thursday, and I'd love to have you join my little bookish family. Comment down below if there's any books in this cluster that you think I should give a second chance to, or if that is too much, please just leave me your most exhausted looking emoji, because at this point I'm exhausted of speaking, and I would love to have like pictographs of rest populate the comment section down there. But regardless, that is it for me. Thank you again so much for watching this video, and I will see you with the next one very, very soon. Goodbye.